What's going on YouTube? It's Teach back again with another video. Today we begin our off-season content. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, want to see more football content, more off-season coverage, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And of course, join me for a conversation down in the comment section. If you're a Cardinals fan, I'd love to have your thoughts. This is just my opinion on what the off-season should look like for the Cardinals. Even if you're not, tell me what you think this team can do to get better and move from, hey, you made the playoffs, to now becoming serious contenders with the right moves. I think they could potentially get there. So a couple of house cleanings is going to be pretty similar to what I did leading up to this now past NFL season when I was doing team previews. This is just more so previewing what I think these teams could do in the offseason, free agency, the draft, everything of that nature. So obviously you see the record on the screen. Cardinals made it into the playoffs, lost in the first round to the LA Rams, now playing in the Super Bowl. So that's obviously something that looks a little better. They have 8 draft picks. They have their own first, second, third, so not a lot to talk about there. This team, though, does not have a whole lot of cap space, and that's a main reason why when you see my free agency, to-do list per se, a lot of it's just bringing back your own guys. And a lot of times that's the focus for teams that think they can compete and see themselves as contenders and then also don't have a whole lot of cap space. So jumping into what I think they could do in free agency, to me, you got to bring back Chandler Jones. And you look at this market, there's not a whole lot of other options. I mean, you could go splurge and maybe bring in a Von Miller. You'd have to obviously restructure some contracts on the roster, which, this is just based off the current cap number for each and every team. Obviously, this could change, and there's going to be restructures, there's going to be extensions and things of that nature. But to me, Chandler Jones is a huge part of this defense because him and Marcus Golden are free agents. So you're already, and we'll talk about this when we get to the draft, looking for a potential replacement for Marcus Golden. If you can't keep Jones around, you're in a spot where you're looking for 2 edge rushers in a division where you play Matt Stafford twice a year for right now, Russell Wilson twice a year. To me, there's got to be a precedent on trying to get some pass rush, and then who knows what the 49ers are going to do, speaking of quarterbacks, presumably Trey Lance next year. But to me, I think Chandler Jones has been a great addition, and especially considering you were the team that made the move to acquire him from New England. If you're going to make an aggressive move like that, I know that was a handful of years ago, you like to keep your guys in the building. So I think keeping Jones around is the best play. But additionally, if he walks, there's Von Miller out there. And then the other options are not necessarily the best to pick from. And obviously, the free agents I'm looking at on Spot Track right now, that's all subject to change because of franchise tags and things of that nature, too. So my second point for free agency, I think Zach Ertz added a ton of over-the-middle-of-field production, and especially once DeAndre Hopkins was battling some injuries down the stretch. And even when he came back from injury, didn't quite look like he was at 100%, and then obviously gets hurt again just before the postseason and then misses that wild card game. Zach Ertz, I felt like added a lot to the offense. And before Ertz, Max Williams looked like he was having a pretty solid start to the season, and I was happy with how he was being used in that offense. So I think you bring back one of those two. Williams is probably the cheaper of the pair, so that might be more financially obtainable. But I could also see the market going the other way around. Max Williams, I think, is going to be 28 next year. Ertz, well into his 30s. Maybe because of the age difference, Ertz ends up being a cheaper contract. But considering there was enough trade interest around the name Zach Ertz, there was enough buzz there. I think there's going to be teams that are in and willing to give him some money. Max Williams, not quite as big a name, so I would venture to say the contract might be a little bit lower. In the last free agency bullet point, re-sign James Conner. I think he added a ton of that offense, and he runs with power, which is obviously a nice compliment to Chase Edmonds, who's a little bit more of a elusive scat back type. But also, James Conner did a great job catching the football. And also, Chase Edmonds battles his injuries in his career, and same could be said about James Conner. The NFL's already moving in a direction where you really do need, instead of maybe one elite every down back, there's still a handful of those in the NFL for sure, but it's more so if you can have a couple of guys that you can feel comfortable getting 15 to 20 touches in any given game, you're in a good spot. And I think that's what the Cardinals have with Edmonds and Conner, so I would implore them to bring back James Conner again. He really did bring a lot of value in the pass-catching game on top of what he could do running between the tackles and even outside of it. I think he's just a pretty well-balanced running back. Him, and then you have Edmonds, who has the home run speed. I like that backfield. And then obviously it gets a lot easier when you have Kyler Murray as your starting quarterback. And then on to the draft, this, again, builds off of what I think their free agency game plan might be or should be. So if they were to knock off those 3 things, the next thing in a lot of my mock drafts, and you'll continue to see this, I'm going to give them Roger McCreary. We'll see about his arm length. Some of those measurables coming from Mobile, a little concerning, but if not him, Trent McDuffie, or one of those man specialist corners in this draft. I think they need to add some extra talent there. I know they drafted Marco Wilson. He was okay this past year. They also drafted Tay Gowan. I was a big Tay Gowan fan coming out of UCF. Obviously did not play in 2020 due to COVID at UCF, but big fan of his game as well and who he is as a person, so maybe there's a little bit of bias on my end, but you got to keep adding some young talent to that secondary. I think as the year went on, you saw that defense go from one of the best in the NFL and exceeding a lot of people's expectations given the names on the roster, and then that regressed towards the mean. So I think where you can get that unit back to its potential full strength or get it back to that top tier status is by adding more talent to it, as well as obviously keeping someone like a Chandler Jones around. So I would implore them in rounds 1 and 2. You got to get a corner in one of those 2 rounds in my eyes. And with the other pick, I think you got to draft an edge starter. And this class does have a fair amount of options there. And maybe if you go, let's say, a Trent McDuffie in the first, I think there's going to be some good options there in the second round to go edge. Maybe it's a Kingsley Nagbari. Maybe it's a Drake Jackson from USC. Arnold Ebiketie could fall that far. We'll see how he projects as a 3-4 outside linebacker, stand-up rusher. But there are options. And I think there's a good amount of depth at both those positions where once they're on the clock in the early 20s, they can say, who's our guy here in the first? And then once you get to day 2 of the draft, say, hey, we went corner in round 1. Let's go get an edge starter to replace Golden, or the other way around. So first 2 rounds to me make a lot of sense. And for future reference, I'll pretty much stagger these in highest priority downward. So obviously, and when it comes to the draft, it's going to be like your day 1 pick, day 2 pick, day 3. I might add that on the screen. Let me know if that would alleviate some confusion. But round 1, I think you go get a starting corner. Round 2, you go get an edge. And round 3, obviously, in play there as well. And then day 3 of the draft, I would think the best bet for them is adding some depth and across the offensive and defensive line. They could use a better nose tackle as well. Corey Peters has been in the league for a long time, and he's a solid player, but nothing spectacular there. So maybe in rounds 3 or 4, you get a good value on someone like a Travis Jones or somewhere thereabout, and get a nice nose tackle to stand next to and play next to J.J. Watt, who obviously has his injury concerns, but still a really good player when he's on the field. So that's kind of my game plan for the draft. I'd go corner round 1, edge round 2. You could flip that around, then use rounds 3 onward to add some depth across the offensive, defensive line, and other positions, right? Like, you don't have to only exclusively draft guards, tackles, defensive ends, and defensive tackles round 3, 4 onward. So obviously, this is just kind of my general outline for what I think they could do in the later rounds. And then to kind of wrap it up, I think if you add to this defensive unit and actually get it better on paper, it may not be quite as good, because there was a stretch during the beginning of this year into the middle part of the season. There were arguments being had the Cardinals had the best defense in the NFL. Now, I don't know if it'll get quite back to that, but if you add more talent to that, and specifically younger talent in the secondary, I think you could look at it and say it may not be statistically as good, but it is improved talent-wise. And if this team gets back in the playoffs, that's where it ultimately matters. And look at the Bengals right now. I was playing the Super Bowl. Think about Jesse Bates in specific. And it's tough to take one single player and apply it to the entire Cardinals defense, but this was a step down for Jesse Bates this past year. Still a good safety, but last year he played like an elite player, and now you look at him in the postseason, he's right back making elite type of player moves. So I think that's kind of what you could use that small proxy and try to zoom out and make that the big picture objective here for the Cardinals. Add to that defense, and maybe statistically won't be as dominant the number 1 unit in the league, but it'll definitely get stronger if you add to that secondary. And Marcus Golden is a fine player. You might be able to get an upgrade there as is anyway. So that's kind of my outline for this Arizona Cardinals team. And then the last note I had, find consistency. Now, that's not something you can pay or draft, right? That comes down to Cliff Kingsbury getting better as a head coach, which I think last year he did make some strides. And Kyler Murray to be a consistent quarterback, right? A lot of people had him in the MVP conversation. Some people had him as the front runner for the first 10 or so weeks. Then he gets hurt, not quite the same guy when he comes back. And that obviously derailed a ton of the forward progress the Cardinals had made, and then he did not look very good in that wild card game against the Rams. So Kingsbury, Murray, got to find some consistency and take this team from 2 years in a row now, getting out to hot starts, tailing off, and losing that steam as the year went on. If they can find a way to just be a consistently solid team, I don't even need them to be great at the beginning of the year and then bad at the end. You can just be good year-round. I think there's some building blocks here, and it's tough playing in that division, of course, but I think this team can really, with the right moves, put themselves into deep playoff run status and in that mix to potentially be a game away from the Super Bowl. Once you're in those championship games, anything can happen. Like, did anybody expect the Bengals to be in the Super Bowl? Obviously not. So those are just kind of my thoughts about the Arizona Cardinals and what I think they could do this offseason. Tell me what you think the Arizona Cardinals should do this offseason, both the free agency, the draft, and overall, maybe even the coaching staff as well, if you want to throw some potential suggestions there. But yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit that like button. It would help me and my channel out a ton. If you're new to the channel, want to see more offseason and football content alike, hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.